Okay, so here we have Bill Ranshaw. I've asked him today to come and have an interview with me because Bill is actually a porn recovery coach. So thank you for being here, Bill.
Angie, thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity. We have several top opportunities to talk in the past, and I've really been looking forward to this conversation. And I want to, when you had previously asked what my title is, I do go by porn recovery coach as opposed to porn addiction coach, because a lot of people come to me not thinking that they actually have an addiction to porn, because that can mean a lot of different things. When I used to say porn addiction, people would say, well, I don't need to talk to you because I don't have an addiction. Most people don't realize that they have an addiction to porn, or even if they're like a casual user, they don't realize the challenges and the problems that it's causing all throughout their life. And so when you immediately say addiction, which it is an addiction, it'll turn people off because they don't want to identify as that.
Interesting. So that leads very nicely on to why I've asked you to have this interview today, because some people that may be listening to this may think, Angie, you're a confidence coach. Why are you trying to interview people outside your industry? Well, actually, there is a great deal of overlap between what you and I both do, because I believe that when somebody doesn't really feel fulfilled within themselves, or they don't have the highest level of self-worth or self-confidence, that can lead to filling a gap, filling a void. And for some people that might lead to alcohol, some people it might lead to drugs, some people it might lead to addiction to work, and in other instances it might lead to addiction to porn. So I don't believe that you can have one of these types of addictions unless there's something within you that's missing. And that's where I believe that the overlap lies between kind of what you do and what I do, hence why I was interested in speaking to you. Yeah. So
Absolutely. I could.
Sorry, I was just about to add to anybody listening that Bill and I have already established there's a slight delay in our connection today. So if there's any weird silences, it's just, well, we're catching up on a little bit.
All right. Go ahead, Angie. Go ahead. Let's fire away.
Good stuff. So just before we get into this then, a quick disclaimer to anybody listening. Bill and I have bounced messages back and forth before today, just deciding what types of things would be worthy of discussing. And one of the things that came up is that we're just going to see what comes out. We're not going to hold back for any audience benefit. We're just going to have freestyle conversation, and it could get a bit graphic. It might not, but it might get a bit personal. It could get a bit cringy. It could get a bit uncomfortable. If that isn't your cup of tea, then I advise you to probably switch off now. But I just wanted to put that out as a quick disclaimer before we started. So let's just start off then, Bill. So what's your tell us a little bit more about what you actually do and how you help people in a little bit more detail, and the types of clients that you actually have.
Sure. It goes back to, which we'll get into my story in a little bit. A lot of us, coaches, we get into the line of work that we're in because of the personal past that we've had and struggles with things that we've had in the past. And in my own past, this was something that I dealt with for close to 35 years, a porn addiction. And again, for years and years, I never would have considered it an addiction.
Oh no, we've lost signal.
Started off porn use. Am I back?
You're back. Okay, sorry. I don't know if it's your end or my end, but we lost you there for about 10 seconds. So we got as far as you saying that you'd been addicted to porn yourself for about 35 years, and then we lost you.
And then early on, after being a casual porn user as a teen, like most men, it turned into a sex addiction in my early 20s for the next 20, 25 years. And so they are definitely correlated. And understanding what that did to my life, and then going through my own personal struggle of depression and numbness and all those type of things, and realizing I have to get control and figure out what's going on in my life. And I tried many things before I actually realized it was porn and the sex addiction that was causing so much trauma in my life. And so once that hit, and we'll get into that in a little bit, how that started, but once I overcame that, I realized that for many years, I thought I was the only one struggling, until I started doing research around it. And I realized there's so many people that struggle with this, but they feel like they're on their own personal island and they're all alone. And I realized it might not be the only roadmap, but I have a roadmap that I used to get over this addiction. And when I first got through it, it was primarily because of sexual dysfunction, and later on realizing it had actually caused numbness, depression, lack of connection, so other many things in my life. And when I quit porn, my sex addiction, my life really started to transform in ways I never considered. And that's when I realized this is such a thing that has a hold on men and women. I coach primarily men, but I've coached some women and couples. But I was inspired to pretty much give up my entire career. I was doing sales and I was making good money. I was doing a lot of good things. I was successful in a lot of ways, but interpersonally and personally and mentally, I was not good. And so my life pulled a 180 in so many ways. And I realized I want to help men to do this. I was compelled to do it. I have the wherewithal and the experience and the story to really help transform lives. And we can get into a little bit that my past. I also was doing production, television and movie production on a small scale, local in Colorado. But we did do a documentary film that was around a woman from my state here in Colorado. She was Ms. America in 1958, and she was very well known in the 50s and the 60s. She was a spokesperson for Timex, AT&T. She was on Candid Camera. She was on a lot of TV shows, and she had a promising TV career and movie career ahead of her. But when she was 40 years old, her father passed away, and it had came out that he had been molesting her from the age of 5 to 18.
Wow.
And so we did a documentary film. I can share that link with you if you want to share it with other people on the on this podcast. And her story really inspired me to make the leap of helping people from what could have been a very lucrative career for me in many ways into a really fulfilling career of helping people. She gave up her entire life of movies and TV and everything to be an advocate for sexually abused children and sexually abused adults. So that really was a turning point where I says, I've got to go all in on this and figure out how can I really help people. There was some trial and error. I really had to go back. There's a lot of stuff that I didn't know what I was doing that was part of my success. So I kind of had to reverse engineer what were all the things that I did that worked, what were the things that didn't work to get me to where I was at. And once I did that, I just started putting myself out there. The first video I did on YouTube, it was a challenge, being so vulnerable to put my whole story and everything that had done to me. People can go to my YouTube channel and find it. And the pouring of responses that I got back from that let me know I was onto something. Wow. So I get emotional about it, so I apologize.
No, it's all good. Like we said at the beginning, like anything goes today, right? So you mentioned at the beginning that when you were having this experience, you didn't realize at the time that it was actually a porn addiction that you were experiencing or that suffering with. What did you think it was?
Like a lot of people that go through life with this, and for men, they start porn so early in their life that it just becomes a part of who they are. So it's never consideration. As I got older, it was a feeling of emptiness, numbness, of what's the purpose of my life? What am I doing? Depression, all those kind of things. Most people do. Self-help courses, self-help books, personal development courses, a lot of which you get good principles from, but like, why is this not working for me? I've got good tools, I'm doing it, but I'm still depressed. I still feel numb. I still feel disconnected from people. And ironically, it was maybe 7 years or so ago, a very good friend of mine, who's been a friend of mine for a long time, he had followed my life and seen some of the struggles I had. And one day he simply asked me, he said, I was telling some things that were going on. I was unhappy at work. I felt disconnected. And he said, do you watch porn? I said, yeah, fuck yeah, I watch porn, as much as the next guy. And he said, have you ever considered that that's causing problems in your life? I said, get the fuck out. No, it's not. I said, thank you so much for your information. And he said, just consider it. And I went about my business right after that conversation. But sure as a heck, the next time something came up where I felt disconnected and I was depressed, his words sunk into my head, just consider it. And so I really started researching, like, what does porn do to the body, to the mind, to the psyche, and all those type of things. And the research was overwhelming of how bad it is to you. But I thought it can't be. I've had this my whole life, that it's been a part of me. And so um, it was March 21st, 2017, when I actually came to the realization where porn was never going to allow me to have the future I wanted and deserved. And I had to finally make that distinction. And it was because of a failed relationships that I had, sexual dysfunction, all these type of things. I thought, I can't go through the rest of my life like this, just feeling numb. And so once I made that correlation that day, that's the day I actually stopped. And that's when all the personal development stuff that I'd done over the years finally started falling into place. Like, okay, now this is starting to open it up. Now I'm feeling more connected, and really starting a lot of rituals in my life, and starting the positive things that I had been doing. But it's like a hole in a boat. If you don't fix that hole, which is the porn, and you're still trying to row, no matter what you do, you put a bigger engine on the boat, you put more paddles, you do whatever you can to try to get it to go, work better. It's still going to keep sinking because you haven't fixed that hole. And that's what I realized porn was in my life. It's just a hole, just sucking everything out of my life and not allowing everything that I've done and been doing to really lift me up.
Mm. So all the good stuff that you were doing with the self-development and the courses and anything else that you might have been trying was just being counterbalanced with negativity, with this addictions that you had with porn. It's like a leaky bucket. That's how I would word it. You call it a ship, I'd call it a leaky bucket. It's like you can fill it up as much as you want with all this good stuff, but if it's still pouring out with all the bad stuff, it's just going to keep being diminished and on a level that you don't want it to be, basically.
Yeah, it was. And I'll go back to the aspect of not being addiction. The people that I coach now, they come in all, pun intended, I guess, come in all different, shapes and sizes and backgrounds.
I knew you were going to say that. I was like, God, yeah.
People find me in different ways. There's people that are depressed. There's people that are overachievers. There's so many people that come to me, but internally, it's the way that they feel, not so much how their life is going, but the feeling of being numb. And I really correlated everything back to what it was of being disconnected. And that's what porn does to your brain over years and years and years and years. It builds a giant disconnect of intimacy, not just in relationships, but with people and human beings. And what I had, when I re-engineered what I had done, everything that I did to overcome it was me establishing connection in different areas of my life. And it was reconnecting with people. There's 4 areas that I say, myself, people, the earth, and the universe. Mm-hmm. And you focus on connecting in those 4 areas. Porn is a giant wall that is put between you and those 4 things of your life. Mm-hmm. And once I started focusing on that and reconnecting with people, it made the compulsion to porn fall away. Mm. And like I said, I was a casual user, once a day, every couple of days. There's some people that I coach that it's every day, an entire spectrum. And so I don't put a definition on quantity or usage of time on porn. It really, once you understand the addiction is understand, one, that you're doing it. And if you say, okay, that's bad in my life, and then you decide to stop and you can't, even if it's once a day, once a week, whatever it is, and then you realize, wait a minute, I can't stop. I'm getting triggers, and this is my first go-to, regardless of the frequency. Mm. And that's when I really, it doesn't matter. People say, yeah, I watch it every couple of days. It doesn't matter. Examine your life and see if these are the symptoms that you're having. And if it is, you're going to have to stop.
Interesting. So would you say that then some people use porn as their go-to whenever they're feeling stressed then? Because I know people that, they have a bad day at the office or something, and they crack open a bottle of wine and guzzle that in an evening, or they go out and buy a packet of cigarettes or whatever it might be for them. Is that the same for people who actually struggle with this thing as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And where I've pointed it back to is, like you said, any other drug, it is an addiction. And since the early days when men start using, and that's what's so scary about porn is it's readily available to people. Kids are starting to watch it at 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. And I tell parents who are concerned, I say, your child is not finding porn, porn is finding your child. And so they have to be diligent and understand at the young age. And most people say, it's a rite of passage. It's just what, young men do, what young women do. It's not healthy. It's just the same as giving your child alcohol at age 5 and moving forward, or a heavy drug or heroin at that age. And then they go through their entire formidable years using that drug as a default to numbing triggers that they have in their life. And there's multiple triggers, in addiction, which are environmental, social, and emotional. And porn is used to soothe any of those triggers when they hit you in your life. And it just manifests in many different ways. And when we're young as men, it's free and it's readily available, unlike any other drug. And so that's why it becomes so rampant. The scary part that I see now is, again, the availability and the extremeness of the porn that I had back when I was in my youth isn't even close to what is out there now. And so the research I did, through my transformation, I'm 50 years old now, that when I first started learning about that, a lot of research says once you stop porn, it could take anywhere from 6 months to a year for your brain to rewire. And it actually took me a year and a half once I stopped. That's how bad it had become, to really realize I had to stay diligent. I saw little glimmers that it was working. But research now is a little bit scary that men that are starting now, they don't know if the symptoms are reversible from kids that are watching nowadays starting young, because it's so intense in the frequency and the intensity of the porn that's out there. I'm hoping that it still is reversible. I always say that there's hope, but that's why I'm adamant when I tell parents, watch for the signs in your kids of what's going on. Disconnection, anger, a lot of the things that you see with young men, be hypersensitive, and then have a conversation with them around porn. Because stopping it early is one focus that I have, as well as helping the men that are now realizing it in their life. The sad part is, or the part that's difficult, in your early years, you can live with both. You can live doing porn and still be successful, active, motivated, and all those type of things. For me, I typically coach men, I say around age 28 to 30 years old. If you're younger than that, I want to give you tips, but it's when you get a little bit older, when you realize the damage that it's caused in your life, that you have to start taking action other than just doing stuff on your own. And hopefully my goal is to help people shorten that time frame to really grab hold of a success of stopping.
Yeah, absolutely. By the way, if you see me look away from the camera, it's because I've written something down that I want to come back to, because my short-term memory is poor, but I don't interrupt you as you're on mid-flow. But one of the things I've just written down here that I want to just tap into from what you've said, do you believe, because it makes sense as I hear you talk, and this is what came up for me, is that if people start younger, actually, let me go back a step before I say what I'm about to say. Years and years ago, I watched a documentary on, I don't know, the founder of a porn site or something, and he'd hire and recruit these young girls that are fresh out of school, like 16, 17, whatever, 18, whatever. And not many of them had many qualifications, or if they did, they just had this big golden carrot dangled in front of them saying, like, if you come and work for me, you can make, $500 a day with, for, a student, that's a hell of a lot of money. And then thinking it was kind of quite glamorous almost as well, and put into this, and you're going to be quite famous and you get loads of money and you'll have people kind of desiring you. And it was really sold to them in this positive way. And what I learned from that documentary was how extreme some of the acts that go on in porn that I was completely oblivious to, because I've never seen anything like what they were describing. And it was, so these girls, they were just, they weren't happy, like they weren't happy kids. I'm going to call them kids because although they were 18, technically an adult, well, they are in England anyway, I think you're 21 in America, but although they were still kind of like in the adult realm, they were still underdeveloped emotionally, I believe. So they were perfect prey for this particular person running this porn site. But some of the stuff that they let themselves go into, like these girls are in tears, like feeling like they'd been abused and violated in many ways. And it's the descriptions of what the stuff that they were saying, what they're being asked to do, was terrifying for them. And I guess which leads me on to my question, because it reminded me of that particular show that I'd forgotten about until you were talking. And do you think it's possible then that as people, if they start young, they almost become a bit numb to it? They get a bit bored of watching, oh, I like this. I like to watch threesomes, or I like to watch something that they find as a bit of a fantasy for them, should we say. Then it gets a bit boring because they've seen God knows how many shows of it. So then it has to get a bit more extreme, and it has to get a bit more extreme to the extent where people are physically being violated in order to create entertainment for people with this addiction, because it's become, you know, toxic, and to a high level of toxicity as well. What are your thoughts on that?
1000%.
Right, okay.
Absolutely. And as I mentioned, I always go back and focus on the porn addiction side of it. And rarely do my conversations go into what my sex addiction was, because porn ultimately was the root of my sex addiction. And having started young, I grew up, I was shy, I was introverted. I'm the kind of guy in high school, I probably would have married any girl that would have talked to me, any girl that said hi, I was in love with. But I never dated in high school, maybe a couple people. I was skinny, I was scrawny. I mean, the typical nerdy high school kid. I was fortunate that I had a popular sister, so I didn't really get picked on or anything. But God forbid, if a woman would have talked to me, I was in love. But my relationship to sex started early, around the age 11, with porn. And this happens with so many people. And then I didn't have sex for the first time till I was 19. And most people say, oh, that's a long time. Whatever age it is, I would rather be with somebody that you're connected with and that you love. That's where I did a complete reversal in my life, is it doesn't matter what age you are, but to just don't have porn in your life, because the longer you do it, that gap of connection, because the first time I had sex was so underwhelming. And I have a video where I actually talk about the experience. It's kind of humorous, the way I tell it, but it was traumatizing. I remember went to the point, it was with a girl to hook up at a bar. We went back to her place. Everybody was drunk. I wasn't drunk. I didn't really drink back then. But all my friends were passed out on the floor. People were laying around. This girl was just hammered, and she was all over me, and we're in this big giant cushion chair. And it was just very awkward. And again, she was slobbering drunk. And at first I'm like, wow, this is it. I'm finally going to get laid. How exciting. And then all of a sudden we're naked and she climbs on top of me. And I'm like, what the fuck is going on? Like this is so underwhelming. It doesn't feel good. It just felt awkward. And I didn't orgasm. The first time I had sex, I didn't orgasm. Mm-hmm. It was a numb feeling. And I thought, well, it's just because it was the first time I had sex. It's always awkward for people. But it turned out that was what happened every time I had sex moving forward for the next 20 years. And so when you say you get numb to it, porn when you're young and through masturbation, you really link your brain to understanding how you can really just satisfy yourself. You get to do it in such a way that you do it quickly and fast and quick. It goes in many different areas to where people have to keep finding more and more. I didn't get to the extreme levels of some that people that I call rape, child porn, incestual porn. It just goes down many different roads. And I tell men, don't judge yourself on the type of porn that you watch. But I also make the disclaimer, don't share anything with me that you've done in real life that could be considered illegal. But if it's stuff that you've thought about and fantasized, I'm not going to judge you, because I know how the brain gets there. But for me, it turned into a sex addiction, because it had built such lack of confidence in my life of being able to connect with women that I felt like a fraud, and that the imposter syndrome that so many people feel was, for me, connected to that disconnect. Because I tried to be the right good person, acted like the good person, but I was still numb and unhappy. So I always felt like people got to know me. I was a fraud. A lot of this was connected. And so it turned into a world of disconnect and vulnerability, or lack of vulnerability, to where it was easier for me to get on the internet and go look for hookups. I was in chat groups, then the dating sites came out, and I perfected a way of finding women to hook up with. And it was easier, I learned, to put myself out there as, hey, I'm just looking for a hookup. And we talk about crazy stuff. And ultimately, I connected with women that were also numb, that had kind of built a sex addiction. So we ended up connecting. Both of us were completely numb and disconnected. So I was finding those type of women, but I felt it was way easier to do that than truly be vulnerable and let women know how I feel and that I was interested. And I always told the scenario was whenever I let somebody know that I really liked them, they would dump me. And so that was a story I kept creating. And so it was easier to say, hey, I want to hook up or whatever it is. And so if I would approach a woman in that way, if they turned me down, it was simply because they didn't like my approach or they weren't into that. It wasn't anything really about Bill. And so it turned into a life where porn felt good. That was my release, but it still compelled me to want to try all these different sexual stuff. So I find women and we would do just crazy shit. I mean, there was just stuff where, it would be like with one woman, and then it turns into somehow I'd find a group of women. Now I'm around a swimming pool with 10 women jerking off over all these women. And, it sounds like fantasy stuff, like, guys, wow, I'd like to be a part of that. Or it never happens. It happens. Trust me. There's stuff out there. If you want to find it, you can find it. It got into like group sex, with either multiple women or groups of other people around. It would get into, I've got stories upon stories upon stories. It's not a brag. It's just what was. One story where I met a woman and she invited me to her house, and this would happen all the time. It would be a lunch break when I was at work. I'd be on Plenty of Fish or whatever was out there and say, hey, let's hook up. I would start little comments out that would see if this girl was interested in flirting. Then I'd take it farther. Ultimately, I would share, hey, I have a fetish. I like to masturbate in front of women. That was non-threatening to a woman. I mean, I had this whole scheme down on how to meet people. And then this was one scenario where I came over to the house and I walked in and there were 10 women in the house, all dressed in ball gowns and masquerade masks and everything. I'm like, what the fuck? And I walk in and without missing a beat, they're like, does this surprise you? I said, this is pretty cool. What's going on? They actually had me sit on a chair in front of them. They sat around me and they had a big cloth down on the floor and a big giant tape measure out. This is crazy stuff. And they said, all right, we want you to jerk off for us. And I'm like, okay, I'm in. So I sat and jerked off in front of these 10 women. And then I shot my load out onto this tarp. And I mean, this is how messed it up. I'm not even questioning why any of this is going on. I'm just doing it. Like, this is cool. This is different. This is taboo. And then at the end, they all give me like a rating score, like cards come up. And like, there's like 7s and 8s. And like, I'm like, why is there no 10s? One girl gave me a 10 and they said, why did we not, they're like, why didn't you give Bill a 10? It's like, well, he jerked off dry. He didn't use lotion. And like, I mean, this is just weird stuff that goes on.
Wow.
And ultimately, whoever had the highest vote had an opportunity to invite me to a swingers party. And I ended up not going, but it ended up in so many different ways where I would find women and on the internet, and just within 20 minutes, I could be at the house and we'd be banging. And so it was very easy to find women like that. But all comes back to me to either being vulnerable and not really wanting to get women that I think were in the same state of mind. So yes, it progresses in so many different ways when you start young. And tying this back into the emotional state, why it's so strong like an addiction, because we have triggers in our life. And in our early years, in our teen years, that's when the limbic system of our brain is really forming. And that's the part of the brain where we understand how to deal with stress and fear and anxiety. And all those things happen when we're young through our teens. Well, what happens is as that part of our brain is developing, it is being linked to the porn use. So whenever you're depressed or anxious or excited, it's a trigger, either, like I said, environmental, emotional, or societal trigger that hits you where normal anxieties come with, rather than learning how to deal with them normally through confrontation, conversation, communication, connection. Our brain defaults to, I can numb it immediately with porn and I can get instant satisfaction from porn. And learning that porn gives us such instant gratification, and I teach men to learn to understand and really value delayed gratification, because that's ultimately how you can kind of cure this. But you have to re-engineer the way you view your life. And the biggest problem that men have, or why it's so hard, is because we start so young with this. Porn use or sex addiction becomes a piece of your identity, of who you are as a human being. Mm-hmm. And for years, because I was a shy kid and I gained a lot of validation by going out and being able to share these sexual experiences I had. I'd even invite guys over. I could get 4 or 5 girls come over to my house and invite friends over, and we're all hooking up and having a party. And so it was like validation of, hey, this is Bill. He freaking hooks up with women, and he's like really cool. He does all these kind of things. So it really became a piece of my identity. And why it's so hard for men to stop is realizing you have to give up a big piece of who you are. And then when you do that, you're left with that stark realization of, who am I? And you have to build a new identity moving forward without porn or the addiction in your life.
Yeah. And the interesting thing is, if I look back right at the early days, even when I got it, when I've been in self-development now for over 2 decades, but when I started working intensively with a coach, one of the things that he said that really stuck with me, which I was aware of anyway, but the way he said it was just crystal clear, and I wholeheartedly support it. Because you just said it yourself, like the person that you were at the time was attracting the type of women that were being like even interested in that type of thing that you've just described, when sitting around and holding up signs of votes, cards, whatever, of like marks out of 10 kind of thing. Now, somebody who is confident or feels good about themselves is always attracted to somebody who's confident and feels good about themselves. If you're insecure, you attract insecurity. If you're confident, you attract confident. A confident person never attracts insecurity, or they might attract them, but they never end up together, because that chemistry just doesn't mutually manifest. And what's interesting in everything that you're saying is that what I'm just imagining being a woman in a room watching a guy with a tarpaulin laid out on the floor to catch their sperm and holding up a card is so foreign from my brain. And that is a reflection of where you were and where they were. And although, yeah, on paper, it sounds like a lot of fun and a bit of a boy's boy and everything like that, underneath, from what you've described, you weren't in a happy place. And I don't believe those women that were there in that room with you were also in a happy place. So it's this, it definitely is a synergy between where you are in your emotional and what if it's physical, spiritual, like development. It will always be a mirror image of what you attract and who you attract, and how you operate with that person and how deep those connections go. It will always be, it's almost like a mirror. Whatever your partner is a mirror of where you are. But they can look very different behaviorally, can't they? Like you can have a very loud person with a very quiet person, or a very dominant person with a very passive person. But on a deeper level, they're both either needing to be needed, or like need to be dominated, or they need to be the dominator, shall we say. That's an identical synergy. And that's the point of what you're saying here, from what I interpret anyway, is that although it sounds like a lot of fun maybe for some people listening, that would be incredibly uncomfortable for somebody that felt good about themselves. That would be so repelling that it wouldn't be the type of behavior coming from somebody that felt confident about themselves.
Absolutely. It manifested in me, on the surface, outgoing. I was just a very inauthentic person. I was charming. I was fun. I utilized those things to get what I wanted in life. Mm-hmm. It was a very selfish way of being. I will say I never hated women. I always loved women. I loved people. I don't feel like I ever did anything that would have been abusive or anything like that. It's like I always made sure I was getting buy-in from the other person that, yeah, this is okay to move forward with. Mm-hmm. But as you said, it's an underlying aspect of needing something. The other key to that, because it is a piece of that, as well as a feeling of unworthiness of it. Mm-hmm. An unworthiness of love, or an unworthiness of being able to have somebody that is worth it, because ultimately you don't feel worthy in your own self. So you're not going to attract somebody. And therefore, when I ultimately attracted women that I really probably would have liked, I think that they could really sense that underlying sense of insecurities inside of me and lack of vulnerability. They're like, yeah, this isn't the guy for me.
Yeah.
And so once I quit all of this and came back to really being authentic and vulnerable, and I really impress upon people is to dive into vulnerability, which is so foreign for a lot of people, and realize that you are going to be so rewarded for being vulnerable that people get drawn to you. And that's what I learned when I started doing my YouTube videos. When I was willing to put it all out there and talk about it, not in a sense of being a victim, but in the sense of, this is what's happened to me, this is how it showed up in my life, and I needed to change. It was vulnerability. I call it strength and vulnerability as opposed to victim vulnerability. When you can find that strength and vulnerability, everything sheds away, and you are willing to put yourself out there, and you can build a sense of confidence that if somebody judges you poorly because of it, then you're like, I really don't care. You might see what they say or see how it affects, because at that point in time, it really becomes a reflection upon them. That's what I started noticing. And I get occasionally like a lot of trolls on Instagram that want to say, you're such a sissy boy. I bet you fuck with your clothes on under the sheets, you know. Got it, my friend. You know, I'll get trolled really hard, but rather than argue or debate or prove something wrong, I will just keep asking questions and say, or either that or agree. And there's multiple times I've had people attack me publicly, either in comment sections or things like that, but I'll just continue to talk to them without getting defensive. And then ultimately I get a message in return. Hey man, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry. The stuff you say resonates with me and it makes me feel bad. And they are able to connect with it, and they realize that they don't want to see this about themselves and realize that there's things in their life that are being a problem. So I've picked up clients that were trolls on Instagram and YouTube and things like that, just by being understanding that it has nothing to do with me, that when they get anger and deflect and lash out, bingo, there's something going on in this person's life. I want to take a stand for that person.
It's a classic self-defense mechanism, isn't it? When you see something, it resonates in a way that triggers some discomfort. I'm just going to attack this person because it's just easier than face it themselves. And I think it's great that those people have been managed to turn around. So what do you think? Why do you think is I have a view on this as well, but what do you think is the main reason what people are missing when they turn to porn?
Connection. For me, it's absolutely connection. They've been trained to internalize everything, and it just becomes very numbing. My whole course that I teach is around connection. It's called The Connected Being. And as I mentioned earlier, is really fulfilling those 4 areas of your life, connecting with yourself, other people, the earth, and the universe. Because when you can start connecting with all those and realize that you are a powerful force of the universe, and your human body, and now it gets really spiritual. I'll get scientific when I talk, and I'm not a guru. I'm not a hippie. You know, I'm a conservative white collar man, and I don't fit the typical stereotype of what a spiritual person might be. But I realized I had to find and connect with my spirituality to put all of these pieces together. And as that grew, and I have an understanding of how the universe works with energy, that we're all one part of energy, and you have to connect with that. And at that point in time, you get to be that stand of positive energy to help attract those. And I always say my space or my door, my space though that I create is open to anyone. If you are sad, if you're angry, if you're upset, if you're disconnected, if whatever it is in your life, if you're hateful, my space is open. I will welcome you in. Rest assured though, if you are going to be a toxic energy to that and not be open to accepting positivity and change, I'm shutting you out. You're out of this space, because I will hold such a strong space of transformation for people that are in my world.
And so to changing as well.
Yeah, exactly. So connection, I feel. I would love to hear what your thoughts are on that.
I was going to say something very, very similar. I think when people, I think people are, well, there's different ways I can approach this. I think there's a number of things that come up from porn addiction, but one of the big things that I think is a side effect from it is that people connect. They almost start seeing, well, I was going to say the other gender. That isn't necessarily the case for everybody, but like the gender that they're attracted to, they see this other person as an object, as opposed to something that they can genuinely have feelings for. And the more attached they get to that, the more detached they become from connecting with other people, and the more reliant they become on using this. So I think it also goes very closely hand in hand with why people, like if they go through a breakup, for example, the amount of people I know that say, I'm just going to go out and get laid, or I just need to meet some people and I just need to feel attractive again, or I've lost my confidence, so I just need to get laid again. Or I'm just like, that to me is the last thing you want to do. If I go through a breakup, my door closes to any other possibility of a relationship until I've done my own healing, until I'm even ready to give to somebody else. Because when you're in a true like giving relationship, in my opinion, you're there for obviously enjoying what you get, but also giving to the person. Your motive is very much about giving, but obviously boundary based. It's not about being a doormat and people pleaser, but it's a very mutual giving. And that's when the connection really grows. But if people are rushing out the door to get laid or to meet somebody quickly because they feel validated, it's the opposite of giving to the other person. It's purely about, I'm going to use this person as an object in order to gain some validation from them, so I can feel good about who I am because somebody fancies me. It's purely using the other person. But so many people opt for this. Now, I tend to say things in analogies to kind of describe this walk, this line of healing, by acting in that behavior, acting distance away. So now you've got 1.2 miles, the thing that you say that you want. Oh, it says my connection is unstable. Can you hear me?
I hear you. I heard you, but your video froze.
Okay.
That's all right.
So I'm probably gurning in some crazy place.
You completely,
so that's basically it.
You completely nailed it. And is what porn does is it creates the disconnect. And when you think about it, that's what porn is completely. You're by yourself in a room, in front of a TV, in front of a computer, watching people you don't know anything about them. And it ultimately becomes a very self-involved thing mentally. And this is what happens in relationships, why sexual dysfunction arises, because you get into a relationship and all of a sudden it doesn't feel right that there's another person there. So it got to the point that even if I had sex, I was never able to orgasm for sex for 20 some years. And I always had to have sex and then roll over and jerk off. But whenever I did it and I got into that moment of intimacy, it became a very alone thing, not just physically, but mentally. And guys that I coach, they still go there. And that's probably the last place that goes. When you start having sex with someone, if you're a porn user, ultimately you shut your brain down, cut off that connection with the other person, and you begin to fantasize either about another sexual experience you've had or porn visuals that you've had. But you lose that connection and being present with the person that you're with.
Absolutely.
And it's a completely, porn creates sexuality to be a very one-sided thing. And so that's what happens. I grew up in it. That was my whole conversation of, it became very transactional. If I looked at somebody I wanted to date, it was very transactional. What do they bring to the table? How much money are they making? What am I going to get out of this? It wasn't, what can I bring to a relationship and what can I provide? What kind of a space in the world can I provide for somebody to be the best possible person that they can be to succeed in the world? And that's the point that I got to ultimately. And when that happened, when I stopped, natural attraction really started happening. I started to attract women in my life that were like, okay, these are actually quality people. And the funny story is I'm now engaged, and my fiance and I, we met on Tinder originally like 5 or 6 years ago. We went on 3 or 4 dates, but this is at the time when I was just about to start my transformation. I was still watching porn. I was still having hookups. I was still doing all of that. She was really awesome. We went on 3 or 4 dates. We hung out. It never progressed to anything. She ended up moving to another city. And again, nothing happened. But I never even really saw this person as somebody who could be a potential, mate. a year and a half, I went through my transformation. That's when I quit porn. I did everything. It's about a year and a half, 2 years later, I actually saw her on Tinder again. And I thought, whatever happened to that person? She was really cool. And like, we disconnected. I spent the $2.99 to super swipe to connect again. Best $3 I've ever spent in my life. And we reconnected. And from that day moving forward, we were inseparable. And it was just ironic that through that time period, she had also gone through her own transformation. She ended up in a bad relationship with a drug user, an alcoholic, and all these type of things. And then she was in her transformation of stopping certain addictions as well. And so when we reconnected, we had both stripped everything away and become really, I think, authentic people, that we just really connected and understood, like, what value can I bring to this person's life, as opposed to what value can I get from that person?
Absolutely. And that's where the connection manifests from. That's where it comes from, right? But I
Mm-hmm.
also think, even from trying to not get, well, I'm going to go there. Let's just get a bit graphic for a second. Even from a physical perspective, I mean, this is what we've talked about here, is the emotional side and the connection side. But even from a physical perspective, I think it adds to a further disconnect. And I'll explain why. Because if people are spending all their time on their own, particularly men, with the way that they have to ejaculate when they're on their own, when you use your hand, it is quite a tough friction compared to a female, to put it bluntly. So if you spend all your time doing that, you have to be more and more aggressive. And then eventually you almost become unable. And this is, I'm saying this from listening to another podcast, actually, going back a couple of years, from my personal development coach. He actually talked about this. And I thought that makes so much sense, because he also works with some people that have porn addiction or whatever. But one of the things he said, which makes so much sense, is that when you've spent so much time with Pamela Henderson, shall we say, and then you actually connect with a woman, it's such a different physical feeling that it becomes almost impossible, because one's very aggressive on your own, and one, you can't even possibly replicate that, because the female anatomy doesn't replicate that. So then what I think happens, as a my interpretation of that would be, is that it makes it harder for a guy to finish when he's sleeping and being intimate with a woman. And then as a result, that can cause shame, or it can cause embarrassment, or they can feel maybe less masculine, or they can feel more intimidated by the whole concept of being close to a woman. So if a woman isn't well established herself, she could even actively shame the guy, which is going to like distort the whole thing and make it even worse. And then the whole thing becomes harder, because it becomes intimidating and terrifying to have that connection. So it's just easier to sit in your basement with Pornhub or something and have a nice time on your own. But in that actual behavior, forcing a further disconnect with having that connection with somebody else, and it creates a spiral, but it only goes one way, and that's downwards.
Again, you are spot on. And that's why it really connects to being a self-confidence coach and that type of a coach, because that type of self-confidence, that's one of the massive side effects of porn, is lack of confidence. Because you don't feel worthy, you don't do this, you either feel like you're going to let somebody down, or again, you don't feel man enough that you're going to be able to orgasm. So the relationship that really caused me to change, it started off as a sexual relationship, as a hookup and we dated for close to a year. But as I fell in love with her, sex went out the window, because it felt foreign. It didn't feel right. And then it got to the point where I would avoid sex altogether, because I knew it was going to disappoint her. I knew I wouldn't orgasm. So immediately, in a nanosecond, it shut down to impotency. But also going back, when you get onto the scientific side of really understanding, just like another drug, of understanding how it works chemically in the brain, and in people who do researches, they understand the correlations between dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin. And where it becomes so difficult with a partner, because the whole process of arousal with porn is lit off like a rocket. It goes from 0 to 1,000 in just a second. You get triggered, you look at your laptop, all of a sudden the dopamine spike hits, it rushes, it goes really high, and the level, and this is why people get numb to things. So let me give the numbers. It's not a direct correlation with these numbers, but say a trigger that leads you to porn might spike your dopamine to 100. The dopamine spiked from other things that motivate you in life. Dopamine is the motivational hormone in your brain. And not, people call it the feel good hormone. That's actually serotonin, but dopamine is what causes people to take action.
Mhm.
And so a porn trigger can raise you to 100. Everything else in your life typically might run around a 15 to a 20, whether you like playing sports or tennis, conversion, talking to people. So porn ends up just clouding everything else that creates motivation in your life. That's why people become so unmotivated if they're heavy porn users. So you have to eliminate porn from your life and reset your dopamine levels and understanding how that works. Where that comes back to sex is to that delayed gratification. You have to understand the arousal process. When you're with a woman after years of porn, the typical signs of flirtation no longer become arousing. Conversation, awkwardness, inside jokes, that real level of intimacy and connection that you have, even light touch, all that becomes unarousing because a trigger to porn is going to spike way over that slow build of arousal that you have in a relationship. Mm-hmm. And so again, that creates that disconnect in that moment and that feeling of just numbness in sex. And that's just a huge sign I tell people to examine in their life is, how are you feeling? For years, I actually masked it. I was always pretty positive. I felt that way. In 2005, I had a godson pass away from leukemia. That's when I went numb to life. And I wasn't sad. I don't think, in hindsight, I think it was depression, but I wasn't sad. It didn't come off that way, but I also wasn't happy. Like nothing became just enjoyable.
Nothing. Yeah.
So it was just kind of a flat line. Serial killer. And part of the psyche of a serial killer, they said, is a point to when you become so numb to life that you end up taking actions just to feel something. And you can either go down a road of becoming suicidal or homicidal when you get to that state. And that's why I understand when people come to me so depressed, because although I wasn't there, that road was right in front of me. I'm like, I can so clearly see that that's at the end of the road. I could either, on my end, it probably would have been suicidal. I couldn't hurt a flea, but I saw that numbness, it was a straight line. If I don't do something about my life right now and change this, it's going to end up there. And so that's when I started the realm of.
Yeah, sorry, just really quickly.
What's that?
We lost you very briefly for about 10 seconds. And I think we missed the kind of segue into what you were saying, because you mentioned around your godson, which I'm sorry to hear about. But then you mentioned, and then you cut out, and then you went and said you felt nothing. You didn't feel depressed. In reflection, it probably was depression, but you felt nothing. And then you broke up, and then you said something about a serial killer. So were you connecting that complete numbness with that kind of path that people end up taking? Is that what you said? We missed it.
Yep. Absolutely. I saw it was a television show that I had seen where it talked about the mind of a serial killer, and in the correlations of being numb, where most people, when they get to serial killers, they become feel because they're so numb and disconnected in so many ways. And the show also talked about the path that it comes down to either being suicidal or homicidal. And that's what connected with me. It's like, I don't see myself becoming homicidal in any way, but man, that path of numbness, I could see if I don't do something in my life is going to lead to suicidal tendencies. And that complete feeling of numbness in life, that's when I really started to delve into the personal development. So that helped. I mean, that definitely helps to get a grasp and start using tools. But after 4 or 5 years, I was still understanding, why am I not there? Why is it still not then? And that's when my friend recommended to consider porn, and realized that's when I realized the anchor that porn had held in my life. I mean, it seeps into every core of your being. Think of it as a weed growing into the ground that when you pull it out, it pulls out chunks of you, and it's integrated into lots of you. That's what porn is in every part of your life. And so and the other thing that I tell people, because so many times I hear, porn is healthy. Porn in small doses is healthy. Moderation, it's healthy, like anything else. In the beginning, I used to maybe agree with that, but then I came around to the thinking that porn is healthy until it's not in any scenario. And the example I give in one of my videos is it's like a house. When you live in a house and it's in a very state that receives a lot of weather, rain and snow, and it's outside, the house is your body, and all this external, stimuli is coming in, but you're pretty well safe. The house, water rains off, it goes off, it's not a big deal. And then one day you're sitting there in a rainstorm, and all of a sudden your fucking roof collapses. It falls in. Now it's a mess. It's tragic. It's torment. It's everything. You have to deal with this right now. Then you examine. Your walls are rotted. Your floors are rotted. Everything. And that's what porn is. You can stay it for so long, but at some point in time, it's going to hit you, regardless of the frequency that you use. People will say again that they use porn in relationships to spark it. In the beginning, that might be okay, but ultimately it becomes more for one person, and then one person starts going along with it reluctantly, and then all of a sudden there's a disconnect in the relationship. So there's so many things that porn of itself, it's just not healthy. People on the surface want to say it is, which tells me, yeah, you watch porn. That's why you want to agree and say porn is healthy in moderation. Okay, that tells me you're a porn user, and the time bomb is ticking. That's all it tells me.
Sure, absolutely. And I think one of the other things that is one of the problems with porn as well is that we're not really educated on this shit at school. So we're told around, I have quite a strong opinion about the schooling system, but probably isn't the podcast for today. But we're taught things at school, like, the Battle of Hastings and the way that the world spins and gravity and the ocean coming in and out and everything. But then we don't get taught around actually how to manage conflict, how to have a vulnerable conversation, how to be shameless, how to connect with other people, even the physical stuff, like how to get a bloody mortgage. Like I didn't have a clue when I left school, but I knew like 1066 with the Battle of Hastings, whatever. So we're taught all of this stuff. But when it comes to, I've lost some trail of thought. When it comes to actually connecting with other people, when people get into porn so young, let's come back to now, when we get into porn so young, it's people start believing that's the norm. So when they start getting old enough to potentially be physically active with a partner, whatever your sexuality is, it can take it down this crazy road of like, what the hell is this? It's, like sexual Olympics or something. What happened to connecting and, caring for the other person? And there's so many people that are out there that actually feel that is the way that sex is. That is what a man must be like. This is what a woman enjoys, and completely have this distorted, completely illusional view of what intimacy actually is and what connection actually looks like. And I think it's almost like people use porn as sex education, and that also can be quite damaging. And I think we live in a world these days of a very low level of confidence of the nation worldwide. Doesn't matter what country you live in, because we're driven by external validation, which is why the explosion of the 2008 social media happened. And it drives us more to what other people think, what do people think of us? And it drives us into this world of disconnecting from ourselves. But nobody really knows how to talk about it unless they've had a coach or they've had somebody that is able to help them communicate in that way. So, and I know so many women that have, and I'm sure this is men as well, I'm not trying to make it gender specific, but I know so many people, shall we say, that have talked around being treated in a particular way from their partner in the bedroom, but I'm being unable to say something because they were too embarrassed, or it might offend them, or it might put them off or something. When in actual fact, the other partner had just been using their porn show as what they believe that how they should deliver themselves in that particular experience together. And I think that also leads to a really dangerous place as well, because you've got one person behaving in a way that's sometimes not appropriate, and you've got the other person unable to say, this isn't what I enjoy. This is actually quite painful what you're doing right now. And how can that ever lead to anything other than disconnect? It just physically can't, unless you can educate me in another way about that.
Again, this is why we both are in this realm of coaching, because you understand in teaching coaching. So my program, as I teach it, it typically starts off talking about the science around porn, but it ultimately comes, it's just a personal development empowerment program, which teaches many of the things that you talked about. Communication, making tough conversations just conversation, how to handle conflict, how to handle anxiety without having to have these default triggers that you result to a compulsion. And when you can do that, you become a very empowered person and powerful person. But when you say about porn being a sexual education, the guys who come to me in their mid 20s, that's typically how I see it has resulted. They say they have an incompetence of, or lack of confidence of, when they meet a girl, they're not going to be able to please them sexually. Their dick's not big enough, and like, nobody's dicks are as big as they are in porn. All right. And so that's a misconception that gets treated. Some guys might be lucky like that, but in some guys, like, that might be too big for women. So I tell people, I said, this is what I tell the men in their 20s. I said, if girls are not going to care about your experience. I said, if you're really present and connected, if you want to be the best, greatest sexual partner that any woman has ever had, you get in that moment and you be present with that girl. When you can be present and connect, it doesn't matter if you fumble, if it's awkward, but if you're present and connected, supported, and hold an amazing space in a sexual situation, regardless of how you well perform, that girl's going to come away and go, holy shit, that was amazing. And that's what you have to teach, that connection, is get rid of this insecurity of how you're going to perform. That's porn talking. That's porn in your brain saying that you have to be this guy who can fuck for 40 minutes and spew a gallon of jizz all over the place. That's because that's just not real. It just is not real. Now, not to say that these situations don't arise in life. Like I said, in my life, I ended up putting myself in these world life crazy, what would have been porn situations, but none of it was real. None of it was connected. It became just sport fucking. It was, I did it for fun or something to talk about, but it didn't really feel good. All those certain things that you talk about, and realizing like real life sex is completely different than porn sex. And when you can connect with that in another human being, it becomes really amazing, because you're sharing something. In my own life, because porn and sex was such on the high arousal scale, I thought that meant everything. And that's what most guys think is, oh, I'm so sexual, I want to get off. Am I going to have sex with this person? In my own personal relationship now, sex is so far down on the priority list because of all the other thing that life offers with a partner. Just the connection, the supporting one another, when they're feeling down, how can I hold space for that person to feel that way and be vulnerable there and create that, and then have that given to me in return, and then helping each other build a life and build a future together. All that becomes so much more rewarding than sex. And people say, well, that sounds boring. Contrary. On the contrary, life becomes so more amazing that you get to feel so much more of the other stuff around you, that sex is just one more component of it, as opposed to being everything in it.
Absolutely. If you can hear any weird noises in the background, by the way, that's my dog snoring, but I'm actually okay with it because it's really cute, but it might sound.
I cannot hear it, but my pups are hiding behind me in the dark here.
No, it's okay. He follows me everywhere. It's like my little shadow. So he's earwigging. Well, he obviously found it boring, so he's fallen fast asleep. But on a more serious note, so I actually read a book called Mating in Captivity. Have you ever heard of Esther Perel? Esther Perel, have you ever heard of her? Yeah, she is awesome. And just beyond and going further onto what you said as well, one of the things that she said, and a phrase that really stuck with me, is that foreplay starts the moment that you finish. This connection thing isn't just about when you're in bed together. It isn't just the physical side of it. It's all the connection that you have, all the other stuff that you've just mentioned, like the romantic moments, just being there for each other, just being attentive, like listening to each other's days, being there as a support, actually putting your phone down when somebody's talking to you, and looking them in the eye and asking questions and showing an interest around it, rather than how's your day? Oh, that's good. And that's the end of the conversation. Like, actually be engaged and being present. And when you have that between all the intimacy, it means that when you get to that stage of intimacy, it's so much more natural because of all that stuff. And John Gottman says something similar. He kind of refers to it as like a bank balance. And he said, if you've got like imagine like a love bank balance, and you've put in money in the bank account all the time. Imagine putting love in the bank account. So when something bad happens, so when you do have a fallout, or you do have something that might rattle you a little bit, you almost have like a cushion of like, so if your roof falls in, if it was put into physical money, if your roof falls in, you've been putting that money into the bank account. So you're not going to panic, and you're basically going to still be okay. But if you're not topping it up, which is what Esther Perel talked about, like the foreplay starts the moment it finishes. If something goes wrong or something, and you have a tiff, or you find yourself temporarily disconnected, you find yourself in your overdraft, and you're living in your overdraft, and then you expect to go to the bedroom and have a good time together and feel connected. It just doesn't work that way. And that is why when you have that connection and you have that intimacy at the end of it, it's so much more powerful, which is why one night stands can never, ever replicate that. Which is why when you're a secure person and you're in a relationship, you never feel threatened by other people stealing your partner off you, because you know that in order for somebody else to steal that partner, they've got 3 or 4 years of close connection and building upon. They've got no chance in even catching up on that, unless you're in a place where you're not connected, and then somebody feels that they're missing something, and then people's eyes and feelings can be swayed elsewhere because they're caught in this, suddenly feel desired, or they suddenly get attention elsewhere, and they can be pulled out of that. You never hear somebody say, oh, I feel really connected to my partner, we laugh together, he's really attentive, we really get on, I just love hanging out with him, we do all these special things, the sex is amazing, but I don't want to be with him anymore. Nobody ever says that. Even with infidelity, anybody that's ever been on the receiving end of infidelity, or even done the cheating or whatever, is always come off the back of disconnect first. And the connection is what goes on between the bedroom. And the bedroom part, to me, is the non-verbal way of communicating with each other that you physically can't ever have that with a friend. That's the only way you can take it to a level higher. And that's why it becomes really special. But if you miss all of that first bit, like Esther Perel says, all that first part of the foreplay, which isn't even sexual, but it adds to the sexuality, it's going to make it 10 times harder when you get into the bedroom together.
Yeah, I tell you what, that is everything. It really is. Building that connection, and you doing what you do, teaching confidence, doing what I do, ultimately lies back on that too, because it is that level of confidence and self-assuredness in yourself that you just said you have that relationship with this person. My fiance is much younger than I am, and she's extremely gorgeous. And I'm not just being biased. I mean, everybody says it. Everybody asks about her. Everybody comments on her. When we're out, people stop her and tell her how beautiful she is. And guys flirt with her and all the time. But it is that level of connection that I know what I bring to the table in a relationship, as far as being able to support this person in so many different ways, that she's not going anywhere. And I'm certainly not going to go anywhere because of the way that I'm treated in this relationship. And that's where all these short-term gratifications really get with people, and even the dating sites, which I don't talk about a lot, but I think is another addiction, because it's so easy to have budding relationships, and you can meet somebody on a dating site and go on a few dates. It's great, but the second you might have a small argument or get angry about something, boop, out. I'm going to go find somebody else and re-up again with that beginning phase. But it's building that relationship of the tough times when you're in that. And it comes back to communication. And, later on when I coach men, it's really understanding that communication and creating expectations in relationships, and having that conversation of, what does this relationship mean? Setting boundaries is another piece, and being able to call each other out when they're feeling like a boundary is being crossed. But in my relationship, we've really defined it as breaking up and separating is never an option. That's just never going to be an option. We're together for life. So in the interim, what do we do when these things happen, that when it comes up and there's angry? And when it happens, 99% of the time, it's me letting my ego get in the way. That's generally what happens when an argument or a fight breaks out in a relationship. Me feeling like I'm not getting enough or receiving enough. It's all about me. And it's typically that. But when you get in that space, if you've set up that communication, that relationship correctly, you realize that splitting up isn't an option. So you've created other tools of, now when we hit the space, what do we do? And you've created systems and realizing, okay, this person just needs to be by themselves for a little bit. We now ultimately, we apologize. We understand like what happened. and really taking ownership of what either one of us had in that moment. And she's just as, she's amazing at it. If something happens, she'll come to the table and she'll come right back and apologize and state why she's apologizing. And I will do the same thing. Not just, hey, I'm sorry. It's, I'm sorry because of, I know what I did and I understand how this made you feel and how this affected you.
Mm-hmm.
And really getting into that and just clearing the space again. I have a whole part of my program that talks about apologies on how that clears the space. It clears the space from resentment building, which is a big one, anger, and all those type of things. And that's what communication is when you talk about going into the bedroom, is when you learn to make these tough conversations just conversation, it becomes really easy. You're setting boundaries, you're setting expectations, and you're being thoughtful of the other person, and you're really just being connected to who they are. And so it all comes together on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And if somebody is going through a journey, like particularly with your clients, where they've come from the place of being addicted to, say, porn, and then they're learning to be intimate with a woman on a genuinely connected basis, that's going to come with a lot of insecurity to begin with, because it's so foreign for them, I assume. But I've done a lot of self-development research myself, and it kind of all boils down to the same thing. And you've just tapped into communication there, and I know we've kind of mentioned it a few times, but even if the person is in that particular situation, the worst thing they can do is avoid it, because they're like, oh my God, I don't want to be exposed, I don't want to be impotent, I don't want to do anything that could embarrass me, I want to look like the man. But actually take the pressure off yourself, and if that happens, just communicate. And if you communicate from a sense of, this is happening because you're not pretty enough, or this is because there's a connection issue between us, it's probably not going to do your relationship much good.
Right.
But if you take it from the sense of, I really want this, but I'm going through a journey at the moment where I'm learning to connect on a more vulnerable level, and the pressure that I put on myself, and the desire to please you and look like the man, is having an impact on how I perform right now. Can we just do some other stuff? It doesn't have to be the full works. Like when you start being intimate with somebody, it doesn't have to be, like base 4 or penetration or whatever, however you want to word it. You can be intimate together if you just give each other massages, or just talk to each other butt naked. Just do something to build that safety between you first, and take off the goddamn pressure, because that pressure is only going to have the reverse effect of the thing that you're trying to not experience in that moment. But the best thing you can do is communicate exactly that. And without the communication, it's just going to create a trap. And the only way through that is just to talk about where you are, what your experience is, what's going through your head, and and hear what the other person has to say about it as well. And the other person has to be safe to, any shaming comments, any belittling comments, any emasculation comments is not going to help in that situation. And when you have two people that can communicate in that particular way, in that particular space, they've got a good chance of a really healthy relationship, because there's not much else they're going to have to talk about that's more uncomfortable.
Well, in that exactly in that space, and I coach guys in relationships to have that conversation, and it's what they don't understand, because the ultimate default is demasculation of, I'm not good enough. Those are the type of things that are going to come up. But to coach a person to have that conversation, I give the man hope to say, just trust in the fact that when you have that conversation, it will have the opposite effect. That woman is going to be so attracted to you because, one, you know yourself really well, and you're being vulnerable, and you're connecting, and you are releasing that pressure. Women become so attracted. And again, when you're doing it at a stance of confidence about yourself and making transformation in your life, as opposed to being a victim talk is going to shoot everybody away. But having those conversations really is the key. And most men, they don't understand is that vulnerability where they think women are going to be turned off. It does the complete opposite. Absolutely. If you can be vulnerable in a stance of confidence, I mean, I talk about everything I talk about. I talk about it freely with people in the world, and they are so drawn to it because they in themselves don't feel like they could have a conversation or talk like that. And I coach people to say, work on yourself first. And ultimately, don't worry about the other person. Work on these ground laying things first. And then ultimately, the attraction is going to bring to you what it is that you want. And really focusing on that. The challenge that I have with some men are single men. because they don't know that what they're doing, they don't know if it's working.
Mm-hmm.
And in my own life, when I stopped porn, I just had to trust the fact that if I stop, I was single, that my brain is going to start to rewire. But that means you're giving up sex. That's what I did. I gave up porn forever, porn and masturbation forever, but I gave up sex for close to 8 months. And then I'm like, is this really working? I don't know if this is working. But not realizing the signs. This was part of my growth, is realizing the little signs, which are, you have the brain fog that's clearing up, confidence starts coming back, you start getting a little bit more energy, but it's so small and incremental. It's not a big giant wow, but these are the little things that start happening on your transformation. And then it was about 8 months in, I went back to a girl that was a hookup in the past, and I had sex, and for the first time ever, I'll back that up. I came real close to orgasming. Even 8 months later, I still didn't orgasm, but I came so close that was a win in my head. I'm like, holy shit, this is working. Mm-hmm. And then I waited. I said, so keep the progress. I waited another 4 months, and I ended up going back to that person. Not saying that I encourage this with other people, but it was just a baseline for me to know that trust the process. That after it was close to 10 months to a year, I think it might have been a year later, that I actually had sex and I orgasmed like that. And maybe it was disappointing to the girl. I don't know. In my own head, I was doing a fucking happy dance. Like, holy shit, I just came, And she's like, is that it? Goddamn right, that's it. Not understanding the win that was in my head, and then really starting to understand that. So it's tiny incremental wins. I also encourage men to understand that it might get worse before it gets better. And not might, it will. The whole goal is, if you're trying to fight depression and anxiety and all these kind of things, when you stop porn, a month into it or so, you are probably going to become more depressed. You're going to become more anxious and have more anxiety, because your brain is starting to deal with things that you used to immediately shut down with porn. Now you're struggling and fighting it without porn, that you don't have that. You haven't cemented those positive, empowering behaviors from that trigger yet. And that can be a very scary place. And that's where most men will relapse. And the other thing that happens in their brain, on the scientific chemical side, is usually about 10 to 30 days after you stop porn. That's where urges get real strong with men again, because your brain will sprout neuroreceptors. Mm-hmm. Because there was these levels of dopamine that came. So you become more depressed, and your brain says, okay, where was that out? So you actually sprout neurotransmitters in your brain that are seeking that dopamine, which will create higher cravings, more depression, and more anxiety, to try to trick the brain into going back to that behavior.
It's what's familiar as well.
And so ultimately that phase will pass. And so you go through stages, and I've got a video that talks about the stages. There's a myth in the porn world. There's a movement called NoFap, FAP, and that it was called that because the FAP is the name that jerking off makes, but it's called NoFap, meaning stopping porn. And everybody says you need to do a 90-day reboot, and that's the trap. It's a good goal, but most people think 90 days you're going to be cured. Like I said, it could take 6 months, it could take a year and a half, it might even take more. But you have to trust the process and put the tools in place that are going to, so when you have that trigger, instead of having a movement to a disempowering negative compulsion behavior, you end up retraining that trigger to lead to an empowering compulsion or an empowering behavior response, and really switching that off. And so for me in my life, where it goes to is, whenever I have a trigger of anxiety, the first thing that I'll do is either reach out to somebody, talk, connect. That'll be the first one. The next one is, okay, what am I anxious about? How can I diffuse this and shut it down? Like, what's the conversation I can have? If somebody made me angry talking to them, how can I diffuse that and walk that back and say, how can I clear the space? Those are now the empowering behaviors that I've created from the anxiety triggers that were in my life. And that's how you get around all of this. And one thing people say, like, where do I start? Like, if I have to start somewhere, where is it? And oddly, I tell people it's really interesting, and it sounds so foreign that this is like it would even be related. But I have a video that talks about gratitude, and it's very cliche to talk about gratitude, but really understanding the power. It's one of the most powerful things in the world of harnessing and being able to connect with people and yourself. Is if you feel disconnected, go around and just express gratitude, real authentic gratitude to people. And it's way beyond writing a journal of, this is the thing I'm thankful for. You need to do those things, but I'm thankful for my health, my friends, family. That's gratitude 101, or gratitude 78. It's the next level of really expressing and connecting with people by giving gratitude. The one that most people miss out on, where the deficit is, and I focus on this, is focusing on how you receive gratitude in your life, gratitude and compliments. People most often, if you're not confident, dismiss it in a heartbeat.
Absolutely.
Somebody tells you you look great or thank you, don't worry about it, no big deal. Own that shit. When people give you compliments and gratitude, own it, own it, own it. Be appreciative. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that with me. I really appreciate it. Own the gratitude and compliments that people give you in life. And those are the ways that I say is a way to kind of put a crack in that level of connecting with people. And so like the second module of my program teaches all about gratitude. It's so powerful.
Sure. The interesting thing is the people that crave, the compliments most are the ones that often reject it. And what people don't realize from a deeper level, how that those two behaviors go hand in hand. Because if they're rejecting it, it's almost like what they're really saying is, I don't really believe that I deserve this. So I'm going to reject it because I'm not worthy of those words. I'm not worthy of you believing that. So I'm going to push it away. So you've left this big hole inside you, which makes people crave the compliment. So then they seek it, and they do things to maybe it can drive into people pleasing tendencies. It can lead people to do things that they don't want to do in order to get that validation. Then when they get the validation, they're very uncomfortable receiving it. And it creates this trap. I've made a number of videos and I've posted on social media around the power of a compliment. And also, even if you don't feel like you deserve it and you're uncomfortable receiving it, when I first started getting into coaching, going back about a decade now, or just slightly shy of, one of the things that came up was my inability to accept a compliment, because I didn't realize it at the time, but that's another story, but I wasn't very confident in who I was. And if nothing more, one thing I learned from coaching around being honest and accepting compliments, that if you've heard something and your brain's going, reject that because that's a pile of shit, you don't deserve that one, love, and you're hearing that, at least share that, because in that moment, that's your truth. So I remember a couple of times at the beginning when I got a compliment, and rather than I struggled so hard just to say thank you. Now I'm just like, yeah, cheers, mate. Yeah, I'm bloody shit. Oh no, I'm joking. But I don't have any difficulty accepting those compliments now. But at the beginning, it was really hard. It almost felt impossible to just say thank you. So my alternative approach, just to start off with something, was I struggle to accept compliments, and it's part of my journey and my self-development right now. So I'm going to say thank you, even if I come across as a bit awkward. And I'd actually share my truth rather than just forcing myself to say thank you, because that felt like the easier way to not decline the compliment, but just share my honesty with, I'm really struggling to accept this, but I'm going to, because it's part of my development, but you might see me being a bit awkward. That felt an easier thing for me to say, a bit wordy, but it helped, until I started feeling actually it's okay to do this, and it's okay to be more vulnerable. It's okay to say thank you, until it starts becoming just normal and okay just to say thank you to somebody when they give you something.
I mean, that's exactly a place to start. And it's a good check-in when they tell themselves, oh, I feel confident, I feel worthy. Really check yourself. Check, how do you receive a compliment? Because if you don't receive it well, again, you're not feeling worthy. And that goes for receiving compliments, receiving gratitude, and also receiving help from others. So many people, like, I have to take this on in my own world. And a lot of people don't want to receive help because now they feel like that they owe something. So here's the other piece on the other side of accepting gratitude, is really put yourself in a state of mind when you've given a compliment to somebody or gratitude and they dismiss it. What is that? How do you feel when somebody dismisses the gratitude you've given? So you have to look at yourself and realizing when you dismiss somebody's gratitude, you are robbing them of the gift of them giving that to you. It's the same thing as receiving a gift on a holiday or your birthday, and then giving you a gift and say, thank you, you can take it back.
That's the
I don't want
I
this.
use a lot. Absolutely. That's the analogy I use a lot as well. Imagine if it was a physical gift. Would you unwrap it and go, I don't like it, and hand it back to them? You just wouldn't dream of doing that. But technically it's the same thing, but just one is words and one is a physical material matter. The other analogy I often give is that you're basically telling the other person that they don't have a clue what they're talking about. So if, oh, your hair looks good today. No, it doesn't. It looks rubbish. You've basically just told the person that they've got terrible opinions, or they don't have a good sense of judgment or something. So we're actually in a weird way insulting the other person's view or opinions on something if we immediately bat it back.
That's exactly what it is. So when you realize you have that power to, when you receive it, you're transforming somebody else's attitude. And if you don't receive it, you're transforming somebody's attitude in a negative way. And you don't want to create that. Don't be a power of negativity in that. So in the beginning, that was one thing that I realized when somebody pointed that out. Similar to what you say, is I feel uncomfortable in this. Once I realized that I'm robbing somebody, I certainly didn't want to own that. I didn't want to own the fact that I was robbing somebody's opportunity to give. Mm-hmm. And that's when I realized I will own that, even if I don't believe it in the beginning. That's when, thank you for noticing. Thank you for your appreciation. Validating what it is that they're giving. It's the same thing as saying, thank you so much for this great present. And when you start doing it, that is the baseline level where I tell people to start working on connection. It is so easy to do. I give tips on things to do. I give exercises for men to go out and do in public to start expressing gratitude. And do it, you have to do it without expectation of return. That's a big piece. You have to, because that was a part where you give gratitude and somebody dismisses it. All of a sudden you feel a lack of self-worth, it wasn't received. So you need to start learning to give without the expectation of something. So if you hold the door open for somebody and you're doing a nice thing for them and they don't show anything in return, you don't say, you asshole, I'm not gonna do that. Just do it because that's who you are. Mm-hmm. And don't expect things in return based off of an action that you're going to give, because that's not living powerfully.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, I talk around this quite a lot in my talks or with my clients. It becomes a very interesting balance, because if you give something and you're expecting something in return, then you're not truly giving. It was actually a secret IOU. It had a secret attached. Now you owe me. What's in return for me? So it never really came from a place of giving. It actually came from a place of taking, because you're fundamentally trying to get something to validate you, that say a thank you, or aren't you a good person, or I'm liked more, or I received approval. It's actually about taking. On the flip side, we can give things to other people without any expectation of anything in return. But if we spend our entire lives surrounded by people that do nothing but take, then you've got a boundary issue, and then you become a doormat. So it's not about giving and expecting in return. But if you find that your energy is depleted because you're spending time with people because good people will automatically give it back. You don't have to ask for it. And you don't get pissed off if you don't get it back. But to actually give it and you feel that you're never getting it back, because some people will take advantage of people that don't have boundaries, you'll notice it because you start feeling like your energy is depleted. Then you've got a boundary issue, and it starts realizing that probably that person isn't a great person to have in your life as well. So there is a fine line between the two, but I absolutely wholeheartedly agree that when you give, it's not from a place of now I expect to receive.
Yeah, that's it. And taking it as you grow your confidence, that's where you're taking a stand for your own life. Is, again, give it without expectation. But if it does come to that, you're giving and not receiving back, that's when you can politely remove yourself without any ill will towards that person. But it's just like anything else. You will start getting it more from the people that appreciate it, and they'll start filling your bucket up more, and you'll be able to give it back. So you'll start eventually attracting people in your life, and you're creating an entire new reality of positivity and giving and receiving in your life. And those other people, I'll still be here when you're ready, try again, but I'm going to evaluate it. I'm not going to give you the world, because again, it's your energy reserves that you're talking about.
Yeah, Absolutely. It's a free flowing energy. It's a give and take, give and take, give and take, but it's not given with expectation to take. There's an energetic difference between the two massively from my opinion. And I also think once we are able to communicate in this way, like we're going back even 10 minutes ago, we were talking around if somebody goes into the bedroom, just trying to keep it on point because of your job that you do. If somebody goes into the bedroom and they're feeling that vulnerability with somebody and they communicate in the way that we talked about, you mentioned it yourself, it's not coming from a place of being needy, it's coming from a place of being shameless and confidently shameless, which is very different from, I'm now saying this to position myself as the underdog so I can get your sympathy. No, that's not attractive to a woman either. You know, sharing your honesty, but from a place of shamelessness, should I say, is a million times more powerful than coming from a place of neediness. Now, often people become resistant to having those types of conversations because of the fear of rejection or because of the fear of being shamed by the other person. But you can't really be shamed if you're shameless, but that's probably for another conversation. But what this serves to do is that if the other person, it goes back into what we just said around boundaries as well, if the other person does react horribly or react in a way that is very uncomfortable and maybe, I don't know, out of integrity or not very kind in some way, this style of communication serves as a filtering tool. So you start quickly learning who actually deserves to be a part of my life. And if you're going to act like that, then actually my life is going to be improved without you in it. And if you're a partner that's talking in this honest, vulnerable, shameless way, and you have a receiving partner that is going to be responds well to it, shall we say, you're on to a winner. You've got at least an indicator that you've got a good chance with this person. It does not guarantee, obviously, but if somebody acts like a jerk when you speak in that way, they've just done you a favor. They've just brought the inevitable forward anyway, and you've just cut out time of what you would have invested into something that isn't actually healthy for you.
I love the way that you phrase that as a filtering point, because that is so true. It's a fine line, because when you're in those beginning stages, it's hard to not make that a negative thing about yourself. But to begin to do that and disassociate that negativity, that is a great place. If you can just do that in the very beginning, share. If you receive negativity back, boom, filter, not somebody that should be in my life. Don't make it about you, make it about that stuff going on in that person's life. Absolutely. And I ultimately, and if you're a YouTuber and do stuff like that, you have to become very powerful to that. Because again, you get the trolls, you get the people coming out and wanting to just talk shit and demean you and say what you're doing, you're worthless, you're a sissy, you're a pussy, you're all these kind of things. And in my mind, first one is, got it. You've got issues in your life. Like, this is all about you and how you feel. Like, I've said something that is enraging something about you. That's about you. But in turn, I'm also, say all you want. I'm not here for you right now. I'm here for the people that get it. And so you can say all you want. I'm not going to take ownership of that. I'm not going to take ownership of your negativity. You go ahead and keep that. I'm going to keep pushing that outside my space, because I'm here for the people that are hearing me and listening to me, that it's resonating with, that I've got to do something about it. And so that's in the same avenue of when you share it with someone and share your vulnerability. If it's batted down, that's a great, fast way to realize that that's somebody that not should be in your life.
Yeah.
And test. And my coaching goes through that, is helping men find little ways to put it out there. That's why I love gratitude so much, because it's a simple way to start seeing who other people really are.
Absolutely. When
you give it and you find people that receive it, that's somebody that you probably want to hang around and have in your life, somebody who's receiving gratitude. And you're not being fully vulnerable in your own life, exposing everything, but that's a good way to start testing things and testing people if they should be in your life or not.
Absolutely. You know what, Bill, I think we could talk about this all day, and I've just clocked the time and we've been talking for well over an hour, and it's gone like that. So it's been absolutely brilliant. So just to wrap up, so if anybody's been listening to this and it's resonated with the work that Bill talks about and what Bill specializes in, where can people find you?
My website is billwilderment.org. And probably the easiest way is just search YouTube for my name, Bill Ranshaw, and you'll see my videos. And you can reach and connect with me through that. And there's opportunities that if you're going through this, I give instructions in my videos that if you think my program might be a way, you can set up a free call with me. So I make it fairly accessible. There's some qualifications on that. But that's the best way. And I want to point out through our conversations, if people realized, and again, in the beginning, we talk about porn and sex addiction, and this is kind of how my program goes. Ultimately, that's not it. As people realize, we started talking about real life communications and things and empowerment. That's where it ultimately gets to. Porn is not really the problem. It's the manifestation of not being able to deal with things in your life. It's just a result.
Symptom, right?
And so yeah, it's a symptom. I teach people far less on how to quit porn. That's a piece of it, but more so on the things that you can do. What can you connect with? Because if you're just trying to force yourself to stop and not put other things in place that you can do, it's going to cause a relapse.
I totally support that. This is not a case of willpower. This is a case of understanding what it is that you're missing in your life. And then you fill that gap, and then you don't need the things that it's showing up as with the symptoms of the stuff that you help people with. So absolutely, completely. Our lines of work are very similar. I don't actually help people specifically with what you do in terms of how people might connect with your work, but the deeper things that they have going on and the insecurities and the lack of self-worth, there's a huge overlap in what we do. So I'm very, very grateful for the time that we've had today. I really appreciate you coming on and having this interview with me. Any last thoughts at all before we say goodbye?
Absolutely, Angie. Thank you so much. And there's a couple things. One, if there's behavioral therapists that are watching this, please make that part of your regimen of asking about porn use. I see a lot of therapists actually coach that porn can be healthy, and it blows me away. It means that they've never really understood addiction, probably. But if you're having a client that's having issues and they're not getting better, make sure you're integrating and asking about porn use, just to bring attention to it and have somebody consider it, and ask them to learn about them themselves. Second of all, to the men that are listening to this, or the people, is understand that you're worth it. You're absolutely worth it. Your future is worth it. The future of the people in your life are worth it.
Sure. I couldn't agree more. Everybody is worth that fight. And some people almost give up on it. They almost seem to think that I've done everything. I remember before I got into my self-development, before I got into coaching in particular, I had done some before. It was almost like I just resigned to every day is just going to be a bit shit. Like, this is it now. Like, I've tried everything. I've gone to counseling, I've gone to therapy, like nothing works. And then I got into understanding on such a deeper level, and it completely flipped my life around. And then I've gone on a further path since then on some spiritual stuff as well. And everything just gets better and better. But I absolutely relate to what you just said, where people can almost feel stuck as like, well, this is it. Like, I'm not worth it. This isn't worth it. I'm trapped. I'm just going to have to accept that this is how my life has to be. And that's not true. There are people out there that can help you. There's expensive courses, there's cheap courses, there's free courses, there's something for everybody. But for the love of God, don't just stay stuck and just hope that one day you're going to wake up and it's all going to go away, because that isn't going to happen.
There is a powerful life on the other side of it, an empowered, powerful, amazing, loving life on the other side of it. I get emotional.
Amazing. Yeah, I can tell. I love your vulnerability, Bill. I love the way that you're so passionate about what you do. That's what makes you good at what you do, right? So anyway,
absolutely.
Thank you so much. And maybe we can do this again sometime, but we choose a different topic or something similar again.
Yeah, I can talk about anything. Thank you, Angie. I appreciate your time so much. Thanks for having me on and giving a voice to this.
No worries. Thank you for coming. I'll speak to you soon.
All right. Bye.
Bye-bye.